I first want to start out and say thank you for this, to the organizing committee for organizing this event. It's been flowing wonderfully, and it's a great opportunity. For I'm about to talk about my favorite thing to think about, my favorite thing to talk about. Besides my son, I just had a son. He has taken over that vastly. I teach yoga, and at the cornerstone of what I teach is the concept of gratitude, being thankful. I basically teach how to stand. For me, core alignment is a deep, prayer-like stance, a deep internal bow, the embodiment of gratitude. You lift up and over your kidneys, and when you do so, your bones fall into place. Your organs swoop into their appropriate positions so that everything works in synchronicity. You feel healthy, your food digests with ease. You feel great. But you also, if you practice long enough, stay suspended in the feeling of thankfulness. Yoga is defined as the yoking of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And I take spirit to be feeling, being able to make choices in your feelings. It's not so easy. And I am truly a Fort McMurray girl, truly. My great-grandfather worked up here on the river. My grandfather worked to build the first oil sands plant, and my father was born here, moved away, but moved us up here in 1974 to build the hospital and then continued working out at the plants as a pipe fitter. And I thought Fort McMurray was heaven on earth. I've said that many, many times. For the opportunities presented to me were quite magnificent. It was in 1978 when I first went actually out to the plant. We went out, family came to visit, we drove out, and it was much different, of course, then than it is now. It was a vast field, and you looked over, and I could see the drag lines in the back, and we hopped over the railing, and I got my own little piece of oil sands in my dill pickle jar. Julie's Oil Sands. It stayed on my toy box my whole life. I just got rid of it. It just almost fell apart. I danced, and I had great teachers, really great teachers, and great teaching and dance still happens in this community. There's something in the water here that makes tremendous dancers. We have some amazing ones coming down now. And I got to go away every summer, you know? And I remember being out at that plant, and I remember smelling sometimes a smell that I didn't like. And I said that to my dad, and he turned to me and said, "Julie, that's the smell of opportunity. That's the smell of money." And I heard him say that over and over again. And I loved when he said it, because it would often be when he was telling stories of his life out at the plant. There's a lot of camaraderie out there. And he would use that phrase in response to people he would meet that would complain about it here. And you're going to hear a lot about what my dad said to me growing up in the next few minutes as I speak. Because he didn't have anything. He was quite poor growing up. So for him to be able to come up here and get a job and chase the overtime, he did tell me lots, I chased the overtime, I really chased the overtime. I wanted to give you the life that he would want, and he did. I was able to leave Fort McMurray and work as a professional dancer. It's a pretty nice life to explore the body. And it was a dancer from here, a woman I danced with here, that set me up. She was a patron of sorts for a lot of years, to move to New York City. Not to move to New York City, to go there. But I had my sights. I always knew that I would live there. So I go. And when I got there, I recognized something. I felt very similar to me in New York, you know? And it became very clear that I was going back. So I came back to Alberta, finished some obligations, and started to set my plans to move. And one of the things I did was come back to Fort McMurray to work for a semester, to teach, and to make money, because the opportunity was here, even then in the early 90s. And I worked in a restaurant, Cedars Restaurant, and I got to know the guys that were here from Ohio, bringing in the big shovel trucks. We went from bucket wheel to these shovel trucks, right? And I actually got to go out and sit in one of the shovel trucks and be there. And things had changed. Things had changed. I moved to New York City. And I'd just been in Fort McMurray for quite a bit of time, so when I landed there, I really felt a similarity. I'm like, this cement is similar to Fort McMurray cement. The speed is the same here. People look at you dead in the eye in New York like they do in Fort McMurray. You know? That's one thing about Fort McMurrayites, they look you dead in the eye. My life there was pretty terrific. Dancing, performing. But in dance, you know, it's never enough. You can stand and you move and you work, and it's just never enough. And it has to be. It has to be. You know, when you see great dance, it's like it goes on forever. Well, for energy to go on forever, that takes a daily practice. And yoga is a daily practice. This yoking of your body is a daily practice. It's not something you just do and get. So right before the yoga boom, I started. Something told me, go to yoga, so I did. And I went in, hook, line, and sinker. Bought a membership there 3 times a day, sometimes. Because when I got there, it wasn't about more. It was about being. And I still got to dance. Because yoga is basically the style that I do, is a dance. I was very fortunate. I got to move to San Francisco right before the boom, and that's where I started teaching. And once again, a theme in my life, I had really, really good teachers. But it wasn't all roses. The teachers that I had at the beginning of my yoga practice were very clear on one thing. They would pound it down into you. No matter what you do, no matter how good you are in this world, if it's not sincere, it doesn't matter. Really? Okay. I thought about that a lot. And that might be at the beginning of my descent down into the shadows of life. Most people that live an artistic life tend to do that, go down into the dark places. Do I feel sincere? Do I feel sincere? For I've never not had. I've always been able to turn on a tap and water would come, or get in a car, push a pedal and it goes. And refrigeration, I've always had cold water when I've needed it. You know? My dad taught me many things, and this is my favorite thing he's ever taught me. Early on, he used to preach this to us a lot. Never think yourself smart enough that you will understand the vastness of the universe. It's too big. Because it's infinity. And infinity is almost ungrappable by the human mind. It's so big, in fact, that every human thought, every imagined idea in every single person's brain is happening somewhere out there. That's how big it is. Now, I'm a very enthusiastic person. I like potential and I like ideas and I like to go. And he said to me, in that enthusiasm, it's a fine line between arrogance and self-confidence, my girl. You tread very carefully. So he came into my mind then. I want to do good. Did it matter? My life began to crumble a little bit. And I wanted to leave Fort McMurray. I wanted to leave New York City, if you can believe it. But I did. Didn't want to be there. And before actually moving back to Fort McMurray, I did a tour of small towns in Saskatchewan. I toured almost all of the small towns in northern Saskatchewan. So I was really familiar with the small town feel. I knew what small towns were. And then I came back to Fort McMurray, and it was quite a bit different, and I really knew this place is like New York City. It was fun. I liked the problems because it was big city problems, and it didn't feel like those small towns at all. Hyper-energized. And I started teaching yoga. And I went to my dance teacher and said, I want to use your space. I'm going to start teaching yoga. And she thought I was crazy because I didn't even advertise. I just told a few people. And we grew, till eventually I opened my own studio. And I had over 500 members from people all over the world. And nobody was talking bad about Fort McMurray, especially those people that have lived in a lot of different places. The opportunity here is, why would you complain about it? the pioneering spirit here. I mean, we had so much fun. We would dress up all in white, and we would go and we called it practice as performance. We would practice yoga all in white to music at various functions. And do you know now, that's a phenomenon happening now. Central Park, New York, and Seattle, people are doing that, but we were doing it here in the early part of 2000s. I loved it here. I worked at the college. I could hit the floor running and work all day long. My dad often says this to me, especially now that I'm a parent. I've heard it. One thing he does regret a little bit is that chastening of the overtime. Is that moving so fast, you know? Sometimes I think I didn't have to work that hard. And I, at that time, started to recognize I'm running really, really fast. I'm working more than I'm resting, and I'm teaching, and I'm loving it, because to sit in this idea is gorgeous. I love my students, but I'm burning out. And actually, I started to get hurt. I started to hurt. I knew it was time to go. So I left, never with the idea that I would never come back, because I will be coming back here all the time to keep teaching. I love layering on new ideas to the classes that I teach. It's necessary. And instead of doing what I always did, I did the exact opposite. For if I'm going to be honest, I got a bit cynical. I got worried about the world. Didn't know that fine line of arrogance and self-confidence, which line the world would end up on, because we seem to be moving too fast. I heard the most absurd things about Fort McMurray when I left. The most absurd things. And now I've talked about Fort McMurray to all my friends everywhere, especially in New York City, because of the similarity. So I did get calls as Fort McMurray became more on the global stage. Isn't that where you're from? Right? So a lot of people knew. And I would get a lot of heat for it. And I took a long road trip, and every little town, I did the Coquihalla Highway, drove the Coquihalla Highway, a beautiful drive. And it was at that steep corner where there's this ghost town hotel that's gorgeous. I spent a lot of time there. I just enjoyed it. And got to know the guy that was taking tickets at the entrance to the museum. And the things he said about Fort McMurray, I finally had to put a stop to it. And I said, "You think it's the place that's the problem? Don't you think it's the global consumption that's the problem?" And he looked at me like that's the first time he thought about it. I thought, this can't be the first time you've thought that. And it was. And I carried on using that argument over and over again, and it seemed to be the first time people would think that, and I would hear, what kind of people would go there and do that work? What kind of people would go there and do that work? Well, I'll tell you what kind of people would go there and do that work. People that don't have anything and want to make a better life. And what's so bad about fossil fuel anyway? I've often said that Fort McMurray gave me my 10,000 hours of teaching. And I was called to task on this by my mentor for this event. He said, "Oh, you gonna call yourself an expert?" There goes that arrogance confidence again. I did calculate the hours. It was 17,280 that I had put in. Thank God it was a lot more than 10,000. And I also said the word entitled to him. And he said, "Entitled? You can't say entitled. That's arrogant." Yeah, it is. So I really had to think. Because what if in the imagination, it's fossil fuel. There are fossils churning. It's a sacrifice. What if every soul has had to spend time in that churning so that we get the magic that is created out of it? Because it's magic what we can do with this substance. It's magic. Think about cell phones, computers, Twitter. It does blow my mind, and it really blows my mind now because I've spent so much time the last month thinking about this, living in this alignment, in this feeling of gratitude, that sometimes I just can't believe it. There's no cord on a cell phone, folks, and you can talk to the other side of the planet. Now, I know it's not oil that is that technology necessarily, but it is this muck, this gorgeous muck that is the foundation. My dad has also told me many times, you know, we are the stars. You are the stars. We are Stardust. So if we are the stars, if we are all that is, then we are that too. And we get to, but there's one thing that's very clear. We need to negotiate it more wisely. And you know what? When I went on that walkabout, when I left Fort McMurray and I started to feel better and I healed by going back to that place of gratitude. But I also learned something. Nobody out there doesn't want to live more greenly. Nobody out there doesn't want to negotiate their carbon footprint. Everybody would like to cut back really in your hearts if you look them dead in the eye. So we have hope. I'm no longer on that side of the fence that thinks that we don't have a chance and I better go and, I cashed in all my RSPs and went for it, so I better retire now because I might not get the chance to retire later. I don't feel that way anymore. If you align yourself in a deep, deep, deep place of gratitude, your ability to negotiate the size of your carbon footprint stays in balance. It's more difficult to go out of balance in this alignment than staying in it when you find it. When I taught here, I had wonderful students, and I was here long enough to be able to communicate with just a gesture. And I could be in a room, and I'd just point, and everybody knew what was up. And I would talk through long visualizations. Imagine yourself with no running water for a long time, and it's hot. There's no cold water, there's no hot water, and you're there, and we're going, and then all of a sudden, here it is. A cold tap and a hot shower. And there were times we had great success. I could see everybody find this alignment that I would be nagging at for an hour, not finding, but in the feeling of seeing that hot shower, boom, there they were. My young dance students, they would come in and tell stories. I love them when they come in and tell their stories. And they came in one day and they have this story to tell me about this. I know the story about this young man that got a bylaw passed in this city to allow no more plastic bags. And they're telling me other stuff he's up to, and they're talking about him, and they're swooped in this alignment. And I have screamed at these girls, kick things, get up, close your orange belt, go over your kidneys. That's the lingo of this alignment I'm talking about. And they would not find it, but in the sharing of what this young man was doing, they were in it. Because the second definition of yoga, that yoked body, is to take that yoked body and move it skillfully in action. It's often forgotten when talking about yoga. My dad also told me that whatever you think, you can make happen. Whatever you want to do, you think it, and it will happen. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. A world full of grateful people, and we will keep spinning. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.